Hello, guys. Welcome to inGenius Prep series. We are in the second episode. A warm welcome to Akash and all the participants who are a part of it today. A warm welcome to all of you. Today we have Akash Hamirwasia with us. He's going to be teaching. So, a little bit about him. Hello, Akash.
Yeah, hi.
How have you been doing?
It's been great. I hope everyone is excited to learn about React because I was
I
looking
hope they
forward to
are.
this.
Well, just a little bit about what you'll be learning in today's session. I think Akash would be a better person to tell you what you would be learning today.
Yeah, so we'll be learning about React, what exactly React is, and how we can build really nice front end applications with it. And we'll also be looking at certain concepts that React brings. And there will also be a small hands on session where you can follow along and apply whatever we have learned in a practical way.
That seems really great. A little bit about Akash. It's a pleasure to have you here. He's a Google certified mobile web specialist, open source enthusiast, and also been told he passionately helps build products to help organization and people, which is really great. So, a warm welcome to you, Akash.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, okay, without any further. Oh, yeah, by the way, before we start off, there's going to be a surprise at the end of it. For those who have attended the Git, you guys will already know that we have Amigos as our events partner. So we are proud to announce that they're Amigos as our event partner. They're going to be, what do I say? They are like a college social network app where you can socialize. It's basically a student's Facebook, I would say. So at the end of the webinar, there will be a quiz which is conducted by them at 6:45 p.m. So you could log in and you could check the description of the entire procedure, and there's a referral code also.
Yeah,
I think that's about it. So over to you, Akash.
yeah. Okay, so let's start with this session. And my name is Akash, as I already introduced. And in this session, we'll be learning about React. And I hope you guys enjoy learning this new little library. So let's start by first understanding how web apps are built in general. And we'll be looking mainly at the front end part of web applications. And the front end is mainly built with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So HTML is what gives your application the structure where you define all the elements of your page. CSS is how your elements look on the page. And JavaScript is for adding the dynamic interactions, which is important on any web application. So that is a regular web application, the front end of a web application. But when the project size grows, we encounter certain problems. Your interface elements get scattered among files. So I'm pretty sure many of us have faced this before. Whenever we are making a simple website, we have one navigation header at the top. And when we need to add a new page, we have to copy that same header and paste it in other file as well, wherever we want the header. Now, if you have to make one small change in that header later on, you'll have to go through every single page and make that small change again. So clearly there is some problem and there is somewhere we can improve this whole process. And also, as I said, making changes becomes time consuming. If you have hundreds of pages, you can't just make one small change and repeat it across multiple pages. It gets time consuming really quickly. Now, if you're saying I'll shift all this to JavaScript and insert and remove elements dynamically using JavaScript, then you are faced with DOM manipulations. Adding elements, removing elements, and synchronizing all that requires proper control of DOM. And if not done correctly in a larger application, that can also become a performance bottleneck. So this can cause performance issues in the long run. So where does React help us in this? React changes the way we think about user interfaces. So let's start by looking into React a little bit more in detail. So what is React? React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So notice how I've highlighted the word library. And by library, I mean You can think of library as a toolbox where there are a lot of tools. And let's say you're building an application and you require some tool. So you can use any of the tool in the toolbox and quickly build that feature in your application. And many of us are familiar with a word called framework as well. Now, framework is similar to library, but what framework does is it gives you a structured plan, sort of something that you need to follow to build your application. Whereas library is like a toolbox which you can use as per your wish while you're building your application. So React is a library. You can think of it as a set of tools that you can use to build your user interfaces. React was created by Facebook, and currently it is one of the most popular library to build front end. Literally every startup, when they start with React, and that is how many startups are working today. All the front end is usually handled by React. React works on something called virtual DOM. So regular DOM is something that is available on the browser, but React uses something called virtual DOM. So what exactly is this virtual DOM? Virtual DOM is sort of a representation of the real DOM in the memory. Because the actual DOM manipulations are performance intensive, React uses this virtual DOM to perform operations and then output the results only on the actual DOM. So this actually gives much better performance. And React obviously has a great community, and this is quite important when you are learning something new. Let's say you're stuck in some part of React and you need some help. You'll find a really large community on Stack Overflow on GitHub where you can search for your problems and you'll definitely find a really nice solution. The official website of React is reactjs.org. And while we'll be covering quite a lot of topics in this session, I suggest you to check out this site and read the documentation about more advanced topics if you're interested. So let's start by discussing one of the most important topics, and that is about reusability. So, what is reusability? As I mentioned earlier, let's say you have a website which has some web pages. So this is, let's say, the home page, and this is the, let's say, the second page, which is the tutorials page over here. And this is one common header that I have in both the pages. Now, let's say I wanted to add an about link on the home page. So since I've updated the navigation header, I'll want that same change across all my pages in the site. But since both are different HTML files, I'll have to copy the entire header code and paste it in every single file which I have, and that will again become time consuming. So this is a general concept in general. Whenever we take some software engineering course, we are taught about a concept of functions. We are said that whenever you have some repeating code, try to extract them as functions and call them whenever it's necessary. This not only reduces the code, but also makes it more maintainable. Later on, if you need to make a change, making a change in one place is easier than making changes in 10 other places. So can we bring this concept of reusability while making user interfaces? And of course we can, with the help of components. So in React, we can achieve reusability by splitting the UI elements on your page in the form of components. So let's look into components in a bit more detail. So components are a way to build independent and reusable UI elements. You can think of components as something in your interface that can live without rest of the elements. Let's say button. A button can be a component. You can use button anywhere in your interface and that will still remain the same. Of course, it can have variations, but the button will still remain a button. Its properties will remain the same. Similarly, you will have an input component, which can accept some text from the user. The look of the component can change, but your component remains same and its logic remains same throughout your interface. So components encapsulate how your UI element looks and its functionality. So I'm sure many of the viewers are familiar with object-oriented programming. And over there, we learn about classes and objects and how the attributes and methods are encapsulated. So you can think of a similar concept happening here as well, where we are encapsulating the look of an element and its functionality as well into one single object. And that is called a component. The fun part about components is you can combine multiple components to build larger components. As I gave you an example of a button component and a text input component, you can combine those two to create a form component, which can accept some input and the user can click on a button to submit the form. So once you have, let's say, small set of components, You can compose them like Lego blocks and build your entire interface with those. Components are completely written in JavaScript, and we'll be looking into how you can write components in JavaScript at a later stage. But let's now try to understand how an interface is broken down into components. So I have an example of a design over here of a user interface, and let's try to understand what can be a component in this interface. So let's start small. I see a button at the bottom. Maybe this can be one component, and I see this button being used multiple times throughout the interface. So maybe this single component can be used over here, here, and also in this button over here. Let's look at some other components. Maybe this card over here looks like a component because it's being repeated in the slider. So we can make this a separate component and use it in a slider. Maybe these items over here can be split as a component, and we can repeat it and add multiple items to this list. So I leave this as an exercise. You can take the same design or find any other design on the web and try to think in this way. Try to break your interface in smaller components. I'm sure you'll enjoy doing this, and it will obviously help you while you're working with React. Now let's look into how you write components in JavaScript. So as we know, in HTML, we give the structure of our UI elements. We define, let's say, the paragraph tag. Let's say we define headings using the heading tags. But in JavaScript, we can't do that. We'll have to use the DOM API to do that. But there is something really cool in React, and that is called JSX. So JSX is an extension to the already existing JavaScript syntax, and it allows you to write markup with JavaScript. So you can think of JSX as similar to HTML, but it has complete power of JavaScript. I'm sure many of you, when you have first used HTML, you would be thinking, how can I add an if statement? How can I do looping in HTML? But obviously you can't do that because HTML is just a markup language. With JSX, you can use the syntax of JavaScript, but also include HTML in it and make HTML more dynamic. You can use the if statement in JavaScript, you can use the for loops, and you can output the HTML based on that. So that sounds really interesting. Now, obviously, your browser doesn't understand JSX. That's why your JSX code needs to be converted to some regular JavaScript that your browser can understand. So there are different programs written for doing this, and we'll not be looking into it. We'll just have all that set up, and we'll be writing JSX directly, and it will get converted to regular JavaScript in the background. So this is some example of a JSX code. Notice how I have declared a variable called element, and I've assigned it some value. Now this value is not a string, it's not HTML, but it looks like HTML. And this is what JSX allows you to do. You can add something that looks like HTML, say similar markup, and assign it to JavaScript and use it just like any other JavaScript type. Now, as I said, this won't be understood by a browser, so we need to convert it to some standardized JavaScript syntax. And when you run it through the program which I was talking about, you would get something like this. So this is where the conversion has happened. It has converted your JSX to a regular JavaScript function call, and it has passed the arguments, the h1 which comes from the tag name, and whatever was inside is also passed in the argument. And notice the function, it's called create element, and it's coming from React, which means React has a way to dynamically create elements out of your JSX that you write. So this is really interesting. Now let's look into some more examples of JSX so that you're a bit more familiar with what exactly it is. This is another simple example where we have a JavaScript function called hello, and that takes a user argument, and based on some condition, we return some JSX. Now notice this line over here. It says hello, and then in curly braces, we have user. So logically speaking, we'll assume that the value of this will be hello curly braces user. But when you run this function, you will see it will not be hello curly braces user. It will actually replace this value with the value whatever the variable user contains. So this is a concept called interpolation, where you are embedding JavaScript in your markup or in your JSX over here. So let's take another example. Over here, I have the same function hello. I have an argument called user, and I declare a variable called how are you, and that has some JSX assigned to it. And we return a heading which has hello, and again this user wrapped in curly braces. And we have how are you as well wrapped in curly braces. And what is this? So this is some standard JavaScript way of getting the current year. So we have written that also within the curly braces. Now, if I call this function, this is what is returned. So since I call the function without passing any argument, it took the default argument as stranger, and it has replaced user with stranger. It has replaced this how are you variable with the JSX of how are you, and it has replaced this piece of code with the current year. So it has basically evaluated each of these expressions within the curly braces and replaced the value which is returned by them in their respective places. So clearly, whenever you need to embed any sort of JavaScript in the JSX code, you need to use single pair of curly braces to do that. Okay, so let's actually move into some hands-on. I'm sure many of you would be watching right now and thinking like I'm just blabbering some concepts. So I have a really nice code sandbox prepared for you. Just click on the link in the description. I think this has been posted on the description, and you'll be taken to a site called CodeSandbox, where you can start working with React right away without having to create an account or installing prerequisites. You can simply open it on your browser and start following along with this hands-on. So I have the link open over here, and let me give you a brief description of what CodeSandbox is first of all. So CodeSandbox is like an online IDE where you can learn about different web frameworks, where you can build different projects using your different web libraries and frameworks. It has an editor in the left over here, and you also have a preview section over here where you can preview whatever code you're writing. Now, in the left over here, just click on the Files button and notice all the files that we have in this project. We have a package.json file. And in this file, if you open that file, you'll notice it's opened in the editor over here. And this file contains some basic information about your project. As you can see, it's called React 101 demo. It has version of the project, and it also has some dependencies. Now notice in the dependencies, we have something called React. We have something called React DOM. We have something called React scripts. So do you mean I have to learn all three of them? Of course not. The React package is the main React library that we are learning about. React DOM is the package that is used to run React on your web browser. And React scripts is a set of scripts that is used to run your project, to build your project so that you can deploy it on a server. So I'm sure many of you or some of you would have heard about this term called React Native. Now, React Native is another piece of technology which allows you to build native Android and iOS apps using the same React code that we are writing today. So over there, you don't have to use React DOM because you're not working in the browser. This package will be replaced with React Native in that case. Okay, so we have a package.json file. Let's look at the other files in this project. So it looks like we have two folders, which is public and source. Let's look in this public folder. Okay, we have one index.html file. Let's open it. Okay, so this looks like some regular HTML file. It has a title tag, it has a lot of comments which you can read about, and there's a body tag, but there is no hello world over here. But we are getting hello world in the output. So where is hello world coming from? We'll check that source later on, but this is the HTML file. Let's move ahead and let's see the other files. We'll come back to this later. So in the source folder, we have, okay, one index.js. Let's open that. And in this, okay, so there's some JavaScript stuff happening here. We are importing React from React. We are importing React DOM. So this is sort of importing the libraries. Ignore this import app for now. And okay, so we are getting the element called root from the document. So we have found only one index.html file, and that had a div of id root. So that means that we are getting a reference to that element in this root element variable. Okay, so we are getting close to understanding where is this hello world coming from. And now we are using React DOM, which we imported over here, and we are rendering something that looks like JSX in the root element. Okay, but we still don't know where this hello world is coming from. So let's try to look into what this app is. So there is an app.js file. Let's open that. We are importing React over here as well. We are importing some styles. We'll come back to this later. And we have something called app, and that is returning a heading tag which says hello world. So somehow our project is linked so that this hello world lands up in this HTML file, and that is being shown to us over here. Now this is happening because of what we have written in index.js and what this render method does. So what is happening is we are getting the root div from the index.html file, and we are telling React DOM to render app in the root element. So whatever React is doing, it's doing it between these div tags inside the div. So this is what this exactly means. And whatever we have in app, that will actually land up within this div tag over here. Okay, so now let's actually look into what this styles.css is. I'm sure many of you would be confused about how we are importing CSS in JavaScript, because that's really weird. When I first saw this, even I was blown away. So let's open styles.css. And okay, this has all the styles. Now, if you're following along, this template already has all the styles, all the CSS written out for the project that we'll be building. So if you will be following along, just use the same class names to get the same look of your project that we'll be building today. So obviously this is not a CSS session, so I have written down all the CSS for you. Okay, so this will import the CSS stuff, and let's actually try to make some changes over here. We have already seen that this is JSX, and we are returning that from this function called render. Okay, let's just change this hello world to say React 101. Let's save the file, and as you can see, you get a live preview or live refresh of whatever changes you made over here. So now let's actually start by writing some of our own components, and let's build a simple post app. So I'm going to add a div tag. So you can just write this similar to how you write regular HTML. And I want to add a class to it, a class attribute called post to this div. Now, when you're working with regular HTML, you can do something like class equals post. But since we are doing this in the JavaScript file, and we already have a class keyword in JavaScript, we can't use this same class over here. You'll notice that it's working, but in the console, we'll have an error. It says invalid DOM property class. Did you mean class name? So this means that instead of using class, we'll have to use class name over here. So now this will work, and as you can see, the warning has disappeared. Okay, now in our post, we want some message. So let's create another div. We'll give it another class of, let's call it content. And let's close the div. Let's just type in hello world over here. Okay, so now we are getting some message in our post. What else does a post contain? It also contains the user who has posted this post. So let's add some markup for that as well. So I'm going to create another div. We'll give it a class name of user, and let's actually close this. And over here, let's actually give another class name, and let's call it name. This will contain the name of the user. And for now, I'll just type in my name. Okay, we have the name, but the user can also have an avatar. So let's actually add that as well. Now, if you're wondering how am I getting all this nice styles just by typing markup, it's because I have the styles written in the styles.css. So if you're setting the same class names, you'll get the same look. Okay, so let's actually add an avatar div. Let's close it. Okay, but we don't have an avatar. So to insert an image, you can use an image tag in HTML, and you can actually use it here as well. But I want to teach you another concept, and that's why we'll actually be using something else. So I'm sure many of you who have worked with HTML and CSS know that there is a style attribute in elements which you can use to apply inline styles. Now, if you try doing that over here, let's say I just do background red, you'll see it doesn't work. It says that style prop expected mapping from style properties to values. So, and it actually gives you an example. So we'll have to add two curly braces and then write the style uh, in it. So let's actually do that. Let's actually first add a single pair of curly braces just to tell that this is JavaScript code. And let's actually create an object of the CSS properties. So over here, I can just say background image, and I'm actually gonna add my picture, my profile picture from GitHub. And if you haven't followed me on GitHub, I suggest you to go to this and click on the follow button over there. Okay, so I have my picture over here, and our post actually looks really nice. Now let's say I want to add multiple posts in my app, and I just copy paste this entire post that I've written again and again. Well, this is nice, but now if I want to add something else, let's say a username in the post, I'll have to copy that and make that changes again in every single post that I have. So this is the right time to separate this post, a single post, as one component. So let's look into how we can write our own components now. So in the source folder, I'm going to create a directory called components. I'm going to add a new file over here, create file, and I'm going to call it post.js. And let's look into how we can create our own component. So we'll start by importing React, the React package, because we are using React. And to create a component, let's actually follow what we have in app.js file, because this app itself is a component. And you can find it out by looking at this. It extends react.component. So ignore this export default for now. The way we write component is we first create a class. So let's actually create a class. Let's call it post. And it looks like we extend from something called React component. Okay, so it looks like we are performing some inheritance over here. And there is already a class called component in React package that has all the nice features. And we're just extending out of it and adding our own interface to it. So sounds great. Let's carry ahead. Looks like we have one render method. So let's actually add that. And we have to return some JSX. So this render method is actually a special function which React uses, and it calls this whenever it has to render some markup on the web page. So this is where you return some JSX, which tells React that, okay, I need to render this on the page. So we need to render a post, and we already have the post markup over here. So let's actually just cut this and paste it over here. Let's save the file. And to use this post component in other files, we can export this post class from this file. And since we have it as a component, we can get rid of this entire repetition. We can import post, and we can use it as a component in our markup. Now, the way you do that in JSX is similar to HTML, but you just name whatever your component is as the tag name of that element. And boom, your component is rendered on the page. And now if I have to render multiple posts, I can just copy paste this multiple times and I have my posts. Now let's say I want to add a username over here as well. So with the user, I can add username, and let's say I add my username like such. As you can see, all the components updated because this single component is being used multiple times. So all of its occurrences got updated simultaneously. Now I want to add a logged in user over here just to show which user is currently logged in our app. And I want to show something similar to this user that we have already created. So if I just copy paste this code, I'll create a header and I'll paste this, save it. And yeah, now I have a small indication of the user who's currently logged in. But notice how I've again introduced repetition. I have one occurrence of user here. I have one occurrence of user here as well. So this is again a right time to split this into its own component. So let's do that. We're going to create another file. We're going to call it user.js. And similar to the post component, we're going to create a user component over here. So again, we extend from react.component and we specify a special method called render that should return some JSX. And this JSX is already present in the post, which is this user. We can paste it over here and let's save this file. And we can export this from this file and let's import it in the app file. Okay. And over here, we can just say user. Now, since we have this component, we can actually update our post as well to use the user component instead of having this extra markup. And it has automatically imported it, and we already have the user now. So this is how, as you can see, we are composing components to build larger components. And everything in React can be thought of as a component. So these are the components that we'll be building. And now let's try to understand how to update this content for every post. Now we have a component for post, but in our app, if we, let's say, want to change the message of this post, how do we do that? We can't just say something over here, let's say message equals hello, and nothing happens. Or if you have used regular HTML, this would be more familiar. You can actually pass content like this. Let's say, hello, this is my first post. But this also is not working. So how do we achieve this? This brings us to another important concept of React, which is called props, or they can be called as properties as well. So props are a way to pass data to your components from outside. So in our example, we use the post component multiple times. And in our case, we need to pass some data, that is the message, inside that component. And using props, you can do that. Props look similar to HTML attributes, and you can use them similar to HTML attributes in JSX as well. Props should not be modified by the component. Now this is important. I've written it should not be modified. So that doesn't mean it's a constant. You can still modify it, but as a strict rule, you should not try modifying props. And there are certain reasons for it. Let's try to look into those. And this is because the props are obviously passed from parent to child. The parent component passes small pieces of data to the child component, and the child does not send some piece to the parent. And if your child modifies prop, there may be some parents higher up in the component tree that will be using that same value. And if a child, let's say in the bottom of the tree, updates it, then it can cause issues in the higher level of the tree. So over here, I have a simple example. Let's say we have three components. This is the top level component. This is, let's say, the parent component, and this one over here is a child component. This blue dot is the data that we are passing through the components as props. Now let's say this child modifies this prop from blue color to this orange color. Now since the reference is the same for the props, this parent which was passing the prop will also get updated to this orange data, and this will also get updated to the orange data. Now logically it doesn't make sense. Just because this child component wanted to make small modification to the prop for its own working, it has modified the data for the entire tree. And let's say this component wanted the blue data, but it has now become orange because the child has updated it. So this is why in React, you should not modify props from child components. It should be only used for reading purposes. So now let's actually look into how we can use props in our project over here. So I have a post over here, and let's say I want to create a prop called message. So as I said, you can use them similar to how you use attributes in HTML. So I'm just going to create a custom attribute or a custom prop, I would say, called message with a string which says, hello, this is my first post. Now, if I come back to the post, as you can see, nothing has happened. Now the changes will only happen if I change this hello world to use that prop value that we are passing. Now the way you use that is by again creating a pair of curly braces, and inside that just setting this dot props dot message. And as you can see, we have our message over here. Now obviously for the other components, we didn't pass the message prop. That's why they are still empty. But if you want, you can pass some messages for those as well. So this is one way of creating props, but I wanted to also talk about a special prop, which is called the children prop. So in HTML, we have seen that you can actually create tags and you can actually add stuff within those tags. So is there a way to capture whatever we have in this post component, which is enclosed by the post component? Of course there is. And you use that, and to do that, you have to use the children prop. So instead of having this .props.message, if I change this to this .props.children, which is a special prop in React, if I save the changes, and as you can see, I get the same output because this stuff which is inside the post is getting captured and it's being passed as the children prop in the post component. So similar to this, I can actually update my other posts as well to have some dynamic content so that we have some way to differentiate between them. And we can create multiple props by following the same procedure. So let's say for this user, I wanted to extract this name as a prop. So I can just do this dot props dot maybe user. And over here, I wanted to actually have a dynamic avatar for every user. So this can also be extracted as a prop. So I can replace this with a template string, which is how you can actually concatenate strings much more effectively in JavaScript. And we can call this prop avatar. Okay. And over here, let's say for this username, I want to create the username out of the name that user enters. So I can call this .props.user. And let's say I do some magical JavaScript again. Don't worry if you don't understand this piece of code. It's just me flexing my skills over here, so you can be jealous of me doing this. Okay, it didn't work. Yeah, that is because we are not passing user. Anyways, we'll fix this error. And now that we have this user component updated with props, let's actually try using it over here. So let's say for user, I set the name as ABC. And if I save, you'll see I'm getting ABC over here. And the username actually got computed from the name of the user from the code that I had written over here, which is really nice. And let's say I wanted to add some avatar, and I can again put my GitHub profile over here. And for the user, let's again change it to my profile. Okay, that's really nice. Now, even in a post component, we have an occurrence of user, but we don't have the props specified for this user component. So let's actually pass dynamic props to this user component. So again, what does our user component take? It takes user prop, and that can come from outside, which can be this .props.user. It also takes an avatar prop, which comes from, let's say, another prop called this .props.avatar. Now this is defined in the post component. That's why if we go back to app, and let's say I uncomment my code, and over here in the post, let me specify user as ABC. And for this as well, let's specify user as ABC. As you can see, if the code runs, as you can see, it now shows ABC over here. We can also add the avatar for the post. So let's say for this avatar, actually, no, let's actually set a default value for the avatar. So obviously not all users in our app can have some profile picture. Some people don't upload their profile pictures. So can we add a default value for a prop? And to do that, if you come back to the user component, let's say I do user.default props equals to, and I set the object as avatar. And over here, I specify a link to get the default avatar. So this will actually fetch a random image from Unsplash, and it will use it when the user doesn't specify what avatar they have. So if I save the code, and if I come back to app, and if I give this a refresh, as you can see, because we don't have avatar specified here, the user component uses this value of avatar as its default value. So this is how we can use props, and we can introduce dynamic values in our component. Now let's actually add a small like button in our post. So in the post component, let's say I wanted to add a like button to count how many likes this post has gotten. So let's actually create that. So I'm going to create another div called header, and over here let's specify a button which will be used to trigger likes. And let's say we just insert a heart emoji over here, which will just act as a way to show that this is a like button. Okay. And we can actually also show the number of likes a post has gotten, which is 0 for now. Okay. Now let's say I want to click on this button and this number should increase because I have liked it once. So if I try clicking on it, nothing is happening. So now we come to another concept in React, or I should say a general concept in JavaScript, and that is how we do event handling. So event handling is a way to listen to specific changes in your application. Events can be something like a button click or some key that the user presses on the keyboard, and so on. There are multiple events for every single element in JavaScript, and using event handling, you can capture those specific moments whenever those events occur and run your own code whenever those things happen. Now, when you're working with regular DOM, you can use add event listener and attach event listeners using JavaScript. But in React, events are named as camel case and they can be used as props itself. So this is sort of something that builds on props. And since we are seeing props in detail, we can actually understand how event handling works in React. So let's look at an example. In this example, I have a like button component that has the special render method, which returns a button. And notice this onClick prop over here. It says something called this.handleClick. It takes this value. Let's look at this value. This looks like a function. Okay, so this function is being passed in the onClick. Now what happens is whenever the user clicks on this button, this onClick function or this onClick event will be fired, and whatever is assigned to it, that function will get called. So whenever we click on the button, onClick is fired and it calls this.handleClick. When it calls it, it console logs like clicked, which is sort of like a print statement in JavaScript. It just says on the console like clicked. Now notice this small line over here. It says something this dot props. Okay, so we are getting a prop and we are calling a prop on like. So let's say we are using this component like this like button. We can actually set a prop called on like and pass a function to it called handle like. Let's say it's defined somewhere. Now what happens is whenever this prop, this onLike function is called, this prop is called, this function will get triggered. So this is a way of creating custom events or firing custom events from your components. So to trigger a custom event, you can pass your function as a prop in the component, and you can simply call that prop within the component. And that is how event handling or custom event triggering works in React. So let's actually add that to our app. Coming back, we have a button, and we saw in the demo that we can use something called onClick. And notice how I'm getting a drop down of all the events that we can listen to. We want to listen to onClick, and we want to specify a function. Let's actually first specify that function. So we're going to do something like handle click, and let's just put a console log saying post like. And let's pass this to this.handle click. And if we come back over here, if I open the console, if I click on this button, notice how I'm getting console logs, post like, post like. So which means we are successfully capturing whatever the user is clicking in this button, and we can run a custom code whenever the button is clicked. So now over here, we are just left with one thing. Whenever the user clicks on the button, we need to increment this counter. So logically speaking, what do we think about doing this? How do we think about doing this? One way is, in general, object-oriented programming. What we do is we create a constructor, and this is how you do that in JavaScript. And let's call the constructor of the parent class because we are inheriting the React component. And let's say we have simple likes as the instance variable over here, and let's set the default value as 0. And to show that, we just replace the 0 with this dot likes. And if we come to handle click and do this dot likes plus plus, well, logically this should work, right? Whenever I click on the button, I trigger this, it updates the like, and I should see the updates over here. So let's actually try that. And actually I'm going to get an error. So just for avoiding that, let me just bind this with this. Now this is a JavaScript thing, and I don't want to get into details of explaining this in JavaScript. So just follow this. That's all I can say right now. Anyways, coming back. Now if I come back to console, if I try clicking the post, as you can see, post liked is being shown, which means this function is called, but I can't see the number being changed. I'm clicking multiple times, but it's still 0, which means this dot likes is either not being updated or this is not being updated. This render function is not being called, which should show the updated interface. So let's actually console.log this dot likes to see if that is even getting updated. And now if I press the like button, okay, so as you can see, the likes are incrementing, which means that this render is not getting called when it should to show the updated changes. Now this brings us to another very important concept in React, and that is called state. So state are reactive properties that control the behavior of a component. Okay, so state are reactive properties that control the behavior of the component. You can think of state as special values in your component when updated can cause a trigger to your render, and it is what defines the behavior of a component. Now the state is encapsulated within the component and it is fully controlled by the component. In contrast to the props that we had seen before, state can be completely modified by the component. It can be used within the component anywhere, but this is not something that cannot be modified. It is fully controlled by the component. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, changing the state triggers a re-render of the component. This is the important part about state. Whenever you update the state value, it triggers a re-render of the component. And an example that I like to take whenever thinking about state is thinking about electronic spreadsheets. And I have to say, electronic spreadsheets is one of the most beautiful applications that has been built because it solves or makes us understand many of the concepts in a much more simpler way. So this is a simple spreadsheet example where I have 4 variables called A, B, C, D, which has some value assigned to them. And this cell over here just calculates the sum of all these values. Now in Excel or in any spreadsheet software, you do this by creating a formula by doing is equal to sum and then specifying the cell locations, and you get the sum. Now the interesting part is if you have ever tried to update the value, whatever is being set over here, you'll notice that it automatically reflects in the sum as well. So if I change the value over here, notice how the sum changes. And this is sort of the concept of reactivity. You can think of all these values as the state variables, which are A, B, C, D, and updating any of them calls render again and it returns something new. So this is how state works, and it is safe to say that React reacts to state updates. So I'll take a second to absorb that. But now let's actually move to our project and let's try to add state over here and see if we can solve the problem of this likes not showing over here. So I'm going to close the console, and to create a state in a component, you have to define it first in the constructor. So instead of doing this dot likes, let's actually do this dot state. And notice that this editor is specifying or highlighting state over here, which means it has some importance. So this dot state equals to, let's specify an object, and over here I can specify likes, and that will be 0 at the start. And similar to those changes, I'll make the changes over here. So let's just do this dot states dot likes. And to update the likes, we can just simply do this dot state dot likes plus plus. And let's see if this works now. So if I refresh the page, and let's click on the button, and oh no, it's still not working. So again, this is not working, but we had seen that state is what causes re-render. So something is wrong. And the problem is of the way how we update state. This is not the way how we update state. In React, to update state, you have to use something called this.setState. And this is a special method wherein you specify the new state of your component. So we can say the new state of our component will be whatever our previous state likes was, just increment that by 1. And then React would automatically take this and update this value with 1. So this is sort of what we call an immutable operation. We are not updating the real value of likes, we are just passing the new value, and React is doing all that updating internally. So if I save this, I come back over here. Now if I click on this, and as you can see, my likes are increasing, which is really nice. And finally, we have something to show to others and sort of show how we have learned something in course, which was taken by Akash, and how it was so nice. Okay, so now we have some state stuff which is working, and let us actually try to update whatever we have written over here as multiple posts and sort of show these posts in a dynamic way, because right now we have hard coded these posts, and ideally it should be coming from, let's say, your backend. So in the render, I can specify, let's say, an array called posts, and in this I can add an object. Let's say the value of user would be the username, and let's say we have message, which will be the message of the post. Okay. I don't know why I added multiple exclamation marks, but it's fine. And let's create another user, and for this one I'm actually going to specify avatar as well, and I'm going to show my avatar for this, and the message can be so something like such. And now how do we use this posts array to create the post components over here? So whenever we think about arrays, we think about iteration, and the way we iterate an array is either using for loops or using the special methods like map, filter, reduce. Those are the methods which are there in Python as well, and similar to that you can use those over here as well. So since we are performing an iteration, that is some JavaScript thing. That's why we create a pair of curly braces. And within that, let's just do posts.map. So map is a higher order function that takes your array and it iterates through every single element in your array, and it returns a new element from that. So in our case, we'll be getting post, and I'll use the arrow function over here, which is similar to a regular function, but I'll be using an arrow function over here. And let's return a post component from this function. And over here, let's specify the values. Let's say user is equal to, it's a dynamic value, so we can use the curly braces. This will be post.user. Avatar will be post.avatar. And the message, so the message should be within the component, so we can do something like this, and within that we can add our curly braces and specify post.message. Let's save, and as you can see, it's showing up over here. So this posts array is now being shown as some interface on our app. So we have the ABC, hello, this is my first post, which is this object, and this is the post which I made, which is this is a new post. And now I can remove these two hard-coded posts, and now we can actually just modify this array, and we can use it to add new posts or remove new posts. And our likes also still work, which is really nice. Now, if I actually show you, let me open this in a new window and try to open my console. Yeah, I hope this is visible. Yeah, so as you can see, we have a warning which says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Now, what is this key prop? So, okay, it says each child in a list. well, we had only one list till now. That means there's some problem in what we just did right now. So from the explanation, it says every child should have a unique key prop, which means we need to specify a prop called key over here. So key is another special prop in React, which is used to uniquely identify an element. Whenever you're using some iteration to show components, React wants you to specify key as well to uniquely identify each of the components in the list. Now, this has some performance benefits. This sort of decides how the components are updated, which one is rendered, and so on. But for now, you can just think of key as some unique value that can uniquely identify your component. Now for this, I can actually use the index of the array because every post will be uniquely identified by the index value that they have. So what I can do is I can actually get the second argument, which is the index. And over here in the key, let me just put I over here. So what is happening is for the first post, the I value will be 0 because it's the first element in the array. For the second post, it will be 1. And for the first component, key will become 0, and the second it will become 1. So this is what the key prop does. It is a way for React to uniquely identify your components during an iteration. Now let's actually see another cool feature of React because we have built quite a lot, and let me show you another cool thing about React. So there is a thing called React DevTools over here. If you click on it, it'll open the React DevTools, and it hasn't loaded. So let me actually give this a refresh. Let's see if this is actually working. Okay, looks like this is not working right now. Anyways, I have React DevTools installed, so I can show it to you. Okay, I don't have React DevTools installed. Never mind. So I guess I'll leave this to you. Just try to figure out what React DevTools is, and I'm sure you'll learn more about it. Okay, so now let's actually create a form using which users can submit their own posts over here in this application that we have built. So let's actually create a new div over here called, let's set the class as post again. And instead of having again the message and stuff, we'll actually have a text area, which is similar to an input, but you can enter multi-line text in it. So I can just type in multiple lines of text over here. And we'll also add a button called submit to submit the post. Okay, so now we have a basic form. Let's add a placeholder attribute for this text area, which will say something like type a message. Okay, and we can, okay, so now we have the form. And another cool hack of JSX that I want to show you is whenever you have an element which does not have any children within the tags, you don't have to type the closing tag like this. What you can do is simply just put a slash at the end of the opening tag, and it'll automatically close this tag as well. So it's quite handy when you have long component names and you just want to close it immediately. So we have added the placeholder, and now actually let's add an event listener or way of event handling to this button so that whenever the user clicks on the button, we create a new post over here. So we have seen in event handling that to capture a click, you just do on click and you specify the function over here. Now we don't have a function, so let's actually define it in our class. So I'm going to come above the render and I'm going to say, let's say add new post. And over here, I need to, for now, let me just say console log new post. Okay, and I can actually do this dot add new post dot bind this. Okay, so this has attached the event listener. And if I come back to the console and I click on submit, as you can see, I'm getting new post being logged over here. So now, whenever this function is called, what I need to do is I need to update this posts array and add a new post to it so that it gets shown on the interface over here. Now, this posts is actually a local variable of render. So we can't actually access it from this method itself. Now what we can do is we can actually specify this as as an object variable, so to say. So we can create a constructor and we can specify this dot posts equal to this value itself. And let's not have the local variable anymore, and let's update this to also be this dot posts. Okay, as you can see, nothing has changed and it's still working. So now in this method, I can actually get access to this dot posts as well. And I can just do a push because I want to add a new object to this array. And I can specify the new object over here. Let's say user, I'll put in my name. I'll put the avatar as well. And I'll update the message to be, let's say, new post. Okay. And if I come back over here and I open the console so that I can see if this is being logged, if I type something, okay, let's not actually worry about that. Let's click on the submit button right now. As you can see, we have a new post logged over here, but if you come down, you'll see there is no new post. This is a new post. This one is actually coming from the one that we had hard coded over here, but the post which says new post is not there. If I click on it multiple times, nothing is happening. So again, we have the same problem that we had with the like button. We are updating some variable, but again, we are not seeing its updates on the screen over here. So one way to solve this is by creating state. So let's create a state variable called posts, which by default will have this array. And let's paste it over here. And let's update the render method to use this dot state dot posts. Okay, and we are getting the same output. And in this add new post, we can actually change this to this dot state dot posts dot push. Okay, now if some of you have paid attention to the state stuff that I was talking about in the previous example, you would already know that this wouldn't work because this is not how we update state. If I click on submit, as you can see, nothing is happening, even though I'm updating the state variable, but nothing is happening. Well, that is because I am not using this dot set state. I'm directly mutating the actual state variable. So to update state, as I mentioned before, you need to use this dot set state, which will take the new state and it will update the old state to have the new state. So this function can take a new state object, and over here we need to specify the new array, new posts array, which will have a new post as well. Now, if we just do push, this is not actually returning a new array. This is modifying the actual array itself, but we need to pass a new array over here. So one way to create a copy of the existing posts array is by using a for loop and then iterating over all the elements and adding new elements. But sort of a hacky way, or I should say it's a proper way of doing it in JavaScript, is using the spread syntax. So the spread syntax works like this. You create a regular empty array, and whatever you want to sort of unwrap inside this array, you just put 3 dots and do this dot state dot posts. And this is a really nice feature which sort of unwraps your posts array. And unwrapping means it sort of removes this array and it only has the elements of the array, and it creates a new array out of it because we have added the brackets over here. So this is sort of a short way of copying arrays in JavaScript. And to add a new object in this array, we can actually put a comma and we can specify the new post object over here. So let's say I'm going to copy this. And instead of saying this is a new post, I'll just say new post. Okay. So now we are actually using this dot set state. We are updating posts array with a new post by creating a new copy. So if I come back, if I click on submit, as you can see, I have a new post. If I click on submit multiple times, as you can see, new posts are being added. So this is how we have moved a local variable into state, and now we are controlling the state to control our UI. This is an important sort of concept in React. You control your state to control the UI. Okay, so now for the post, actually, it's inserting it at the bottom of the list, but I want it at the top because it's the most recent post. So what I can do is actually move this object over here at the top. So now if I come back over here, if I click submit, a new post gets added to the top. And our likes and stuff still works because that is a part of the posts component. So this is how we have added the post state variable, and now we are adding new post. But notice how we haven't made use of this text area. We are still having some hard-coded new post message being added every time we click on submit. So to actually connect this text area, we need to actually add a new state variable because we don't have access to this value directly. You can use DOM to get the value of this text area, but a better way is to use your state variables, which you have. So let's say we create a state variable called message, which will be an empty string by default. And in the text area, I can specify that state variable using the value attribute. So I can just do this dot state dot message. Okay. Now if I come back and try typing in the text area, you will see nothing is happening. I'm literally typing something, but I can't see any updates. So what is happening is because our state message is an empty string, and we are specifying the value attribute in text area as an empty string, whatever we type will not be captured, and only whatever is there in this value will be shown. So whatever you're typing, nothing is happening because this is always an empty string. So now we need to update this message with whatever the user enters so that it gets shown in this text area. So how do we listen to changes happening in this text area? Well, we use an event listener. Text area has an event listener called onChange, and in fact, even inputs have onChange event listener. So if you're using input, the process will be the same. So we'll specify onChange, and over here we'll specify a function, let's say handle change, because this is how we attach event listeners. Remember that concept, this is an event listener, and this is how we create or we attach functions to your events. We haven't specified this function, so let's specify that. And we'll change this dot set state, and we can set the state as message. Now, how do we get the value of message? Well, if you have worked with events in JavaScript, you know there is an event object which is also passed. And to get the value, we can simply do e.target, which will get the text area and the value, which is the value inside that. So now that we have done this, if we come back, let's type something, hello. And as you can see, we are able to type something over here. Let's see if the React DevTools is working. Okay, it's not. So what I wanted to show was whenever you, so the setup that we have right now with a message state variable, whatever we are typing right now is in sync with whatever this message state variable is. So right now we have typed hello world, and internally in the app component, message will also contain the value hello world. If I change this to just hello, now the message state variable will have hello. This would have been easier to understand with React DevTools, but for some reason it's not working over here. Anyways, so now that we have a state variable which holds the value whatever the text area has, we can actually make use of it in this new post function over here. So instead of hard coding new post, I can just say this dot state dot message, because this has the value of whatever we type in this text area. Let me save this file. Now if I come back and say this post is from text area, and if I click on submit, notice how a new post is added and it says this post is from text area. So this is how you connect your inputs and text areas with your state, and using that state variable, you can perform other operations. Notice how our text area is still actually filled with some text. What I want is when you click on submit, this should get deleted because we have created a new post. So what we need to do is change the value of text area. Now, since we already have the value in the state variable, let's just modify state to see if this works or not. So in this dot set state, I can specify the new value of message. So let's say I want the new value to be an empty string. Let's save it. If I come back, I just type in 123, submit. As you can see, the text area is empty and a new post is added as well. And we can still do the likes and stuff over here. And it's working properly. So this is how we sort of think in React. We think in terms of components, state, props, some of the building blocks of React. Now let's actually add a button to delete posts. So if I come back to post, I want to add a button just beside the like to delete a post. So to do that, I can actually add a button in the post component. Let me create a div and let's specify, let's create a new button and let's say delete post. Okay. Now if I click on this button, delete post, you'll see that the likes counter is increasing. This is because we have the handle click still bound to this click event listener of this button as well. So we need to change it. We need to create a new function to do this. So let's say we can do something like handle delete, and we can just console log for now, deleted. Let's say. Okay. And when you click on this, we need to actually call that function handle delete. Now, if I come back to the page, let me actually close this so that we have more space to work with. Delete post. As you can see, we are getting deleted. So we are calling this function handle delete whenever we are clicking this button. Now what I want to do is delete this post, remove this post from this posts array, which we have specified here. Now, obviously, we don't have access to this posts state variable in our component. As I said earlier, state variable is a part of the component and it's not available outside the component unless you pass it using event listeners or props. So one way to actually get this post is by passing it as a prop. But we can't modify posts then. As I said earlier, you should not modify your props. And if we pass it as props, in this case, we won't be able to modify it. So what is a better way to do it? So you can create a custom event listener for this. You can trigger custom events whenever this happens. So let's say whenever the user clicks on delete post, I want to trigger a custom event from the post component itself, which I can capture from wherever I'm using post, and I can call some custom function that can perform some operation in this post array. So let's try doing that. As I showed in the earlier example, to perform that operation, what you have to do is just create a prop, create a new prop, which should be called from your component. So this on delete will be passed whenever we are using this post component, and whenever the button is clicked, we are just calling whatever the value is of this prop on delete. So if I save this, if I come to app.js, and in the post, let's say I do on delete, because this is a new prop that I've added, I can specify a new function, a new event listener over here. Then I can call it delete post, and I can bind this to it. Okay, let me check if I'm doing that over here. Yeah. So let's specify the delete function, delete post, and this is where we can modify the posts array, similar to how we did for add new post. So as I said earlier, you can't just do this dot state dot post dot splice, let's say some index and then some count, which is 1. This won't work because again, splicing is an operation that mutates the original array. But in this case, we want to create a new array out of the existing array. So we can use a function called filter. So filter is present in Python as well, and it is used to iterate through a list and filter out elements based on some condition. So in this case, we can do a similar thing. Let's say we are using, as I said, this dot set state to update the variable posts. and we can do this dot state dot posts dot filter, and over here we can specify a callback function which will have a post, and I need to add some condition over here. But how do I tell which button was the post clicked from? So let me hide this error. Over here I have like two posts, and if I click on this delete post, I don't know in this function for which post the button was clicked. I don't have a unique way of identifying which post this was clicked for. So to do that, actually, we can specify some arguments while calling this event listener. Let's say over here, I also want to pass an argument, which is the index of this element. Because while iterating in map, we get the index, which we are using as key. And if we pass that with the delete function, whenever it's called, we can easily identify, okay, this is the first post, this is the second post, and we can delete it accordingly. Okay, so we are passing that, and we can access it from this function as an argument. And over here, let's say I call this argument as index, and in this filter I'll also get the index of the current element in the iteration, and I can write a condition I not equal to index. So what this will do is it'll only include the elements that don't have the index I, and the element which has the index I is the one to get removed. So if we come back and test our code, let's say I click on delete post, as you can see it's deleted. If I click on this as well, it will get deleted. So now we have built a really nice application where users can create a new post, they can submit to create a new post, they can like a post, and they can delete a post, like such. So this is how we pass events, we modify state, and this is how we write components in React. Now let's move on to the last concept that we'll be learning today, and that is lifecycle methods. So I'm sure many of you will be bored by now. If not, then it's really great that you're staying for this long. But this is the last concept that we'll be taking, and it is one of the sort of a different concept compared to rest of the tools that you've worked with, and it's called the lifecycle methods. So as you know, all living creatures have some life cycle, and similar to that, life cycle methods specify different points in the life cycle of your component. So you can use it to capture different points in your component's life cycle. Every component has a following life cycle, which includes few phases. The first phase is mounting. This is the first. This is the phase where the component is first time rendered on your page. Updating, which means component re-rendering. So whenever your component re-renders, which can happen because the state variable has changed, that is known as the updating phase. And the last phase is unmounting, which is when your component is destroyed from your page. So these are the three main phases in a component's lifecycle: mounting, updating, and unmounting. So there are many methods in React to capture specific paths in each of these phases. We look at only one example, which is component did mount method. So let's actually move back to the editor, and let's try to add a component did mount. So over here in the app class component, we can specify a function called component did mount. And as you can see, I'm getting auto completion that this function is there. And we can actually just say console log component did mount. Okay. Now if I come back to console, as you can see, it's already logged on the console. If I refresh this page, ignore these three errors, you can see again I get the component did mount. So what is happening is whenever this app component is being mounted on the page, it has finished rendering, and then this function gets called component did mount. So this is the function which is usually used to specify your API calls. Let's say in our case, this post was coming from some backend server, and we had to make, let's say, an API request to get these posts. So you would do that over here. A simple sort of example would be, I'll actually write this in comment, what you would do is, let's say you're using fetch, you specify the URL of your server from where you want the data, and then you can do, let's say, .then to get the result object, convert that to JSON, and then you can take the data, whatever you have received, and you can update your state variable, is.set state, with the new data that we have received. Like such. Now, ignore if you don't understand this, because this is mainly a JavaScript thing, and if you don't know JavaScript, it's quite hard to explain what is actually happening here. So basic way to understand is we are making a call to server for some data, and it returns us some data, and we are updating our state posts variable with this new data. So as we have seen, if we update the post state, it'll render whatever is in the state. So we are updating the state with some data from our backend, and that will get shown on the page. So component did mount is sort of the place where you perform these API calls and other asynchronous operations. A simple example that I can give you is by updating this heading. Let's say I have a heading state variable which says React 101, and after, let's say, 2 seconds, I want this to be updated to, let's say, posts app. So I can specify that timeout in the component did mount. I can say this, or not this. Let's just say the, set timeout, because this is a regular JavaScript function. And we specify a callback, and we also specify the duration in milliseconds. So we want this to run after 2 seconds. And after 2 seconds, just update the state variable with heading to be posts app. Okay. Now, obviously, this won't work because we haven't updated our render to use the state variable. So let's actually make that change. Let's do this state.heading. Let's save it. And as you can see, if I refresh the page, notice how for the first second or first 2 seconds, it's React 101 and it changes to posts app. So again, this set timeout is an asynchronous operation. And as I said, this should go in component did mount. So similar to component did mount, we have other lifecycle methods like component will unmount, component did update, again, which captures specific points in your component's lifecycle. And that's why they are called lifecycle methods. Okay, so this sort of completes our project, and I strongly urge that if you have built this, try adding some new features to it. Maybe add an edit button over here to edit the post, and yeah, so on, because I think you'll learn quite a lot by doing that. Okay, so for this entire session, we use something called CodeSandbox. And while it is a great tool for learning and testing React projects, the ideal way to create a React project and working on a React project is on your local system. So to build a real project with React, we need a better setup. And that better setup can be done on your local system. So I want to introduce a tool called Create React App, which is a command line tool, and that sort of sets up a React project, similar to how CodeSandbox does. You just type in like one command and it sets up the entire React project, and you can jump in and start coding. But the prerequisites to use Create React App is you need to have Node.js installed on your system. You need to also have npm installed on your system to work with Create React App. Once you have installed these two, you can go to this site, which is the official documentation of Create React App. And literally, this is the code to create a new React project. Just do npx create React App, give the name to your app, change your directory to that app, and run npm start to start coding. So that was it. Thank you for attending. I would like to say that while we covered quite a lot in this short period of time, thinking in React takes time. We have learned about quite a lot of concepts: components, state, props, events, lifecycle methods, and so on. So try building something out of it, because building proper component, building nice components, thinking about how your data flows in the application is something that takes time, and it only comes by practice. And if you actually enjoyed this session, I would suggest you go to the official React documentation, to learn about more advanced concepts and patterns that we didn't get time to discuss in this session. And again, if you like this course and in this session, you can actually connect with me on GitHub, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I have specified the links to those over here. Just take a snapshot and just follow me over there. Okay, thank you.
Wow, that was a very great session, Akash. Very insightful and very informative. I'm sure, along with me, a lot of them would have learned a lot about React and how to develop a website from scratch using React. It was a very good, very nice session. Thank you for the amazing session. Guys, if you have any questions, doubts, feedbacks, quiz, anything at all, please let us know in the comment section below and we'll get back to you on that. While we are at that, there's going to be a quiz in another 15 minutes, as I mentioned earlier. So please stay tuned for that. Go to the description box below and just follow the procedure, sign up for it, use the referral code, and if you win the quiz, you know you're going to win cash prizes worth up to 1K. Also, last but not the least, I'm proud to actually say it out loud that inGenius is going global this time. So it's not just restricted to India. So you can be sitting anywhere in the globe, anywhere, and you can still participate in this. So I think this is a really good chance now that this is the new normal and everything's happening virtually. So if you have any questions, please let us know in the comment section and we'll get back to you on that. And the live is going to be saved. So if you have any doubts or if you want to rewatch it, you could always come back for the live session. So how did you think the session was, Akash? Was it after a long time that you did this? How was it for you?
This was actually my third webinar, I think,
Oh, that's
and
great.
sort of like I guess the second workshop with about
Hmm.
React. The last workshop of React that I'd taken was last year.
Okay.
That was when we were doing it offline. So
Hmm.
again, it's really nice to giving this small session on React. So yeah, it was a
That's
really
good.
nice experience.
I'm sure all the participants who viewed this also would have enjoyed it. Okay, guys, I think we are done here for today. That was the end of the second prep series with inGenius, Get Set Prep. So follow us on all our social media handles that will be there in the description down below on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. We're there everywhere. And if you have any queries, please reach out to us and we would be very glad to help you out. And again, 6:45, there's a quiz. So please follow the procedure and attend the quiz. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Akash. Thank you.